brothers and sisters. Welcome to Malaysian Economy Forum 2026. I'm Shamsul Haris, your MC for tonight's event. Here in Senate Hall, IIUM, praise be to Allah the Almighty for His blessings. We are able to gather here today. Before we start, let us tell you why we are gathered here under one roof at the Senate Hall. It is for the first ever, the inaugural Malaysian Economy Forum 2026, an event organized by the Office of Deputy Rector, Research, Innovation and Development, together with the Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences as the pivotal event facing 2026 for Malaysian perspective. So, to bless our event, we'll begin our wonderful night with dua recitation. I would like to invite Brother Khairuddin to recite the dua. Tafaddal.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Hamdan syakirin, hamdan yuwafi namahu wa yukafi mazidah. Ya Rabbana lakal hamdu kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhika wa azimi sultanik. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Ya Allah, Ya Rahim, praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Peace and blessing be upon our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions and for those who followed his example till the judgment day. Ya Allah, on this blessed evening, in conjunction with the Malaysian Economy Forum 2026, we beseech thee and are grateful towards you in favor of all the infinite blessing to us, your humble servant, to live a safe and prosperous life. We seek your blessing for the flawless progress of this event from the beginning till the end. We seek your guidance to steer clear of events that would be detrimental to the progress of this event. Ya Allah, Ya Latif, wa Ya Rahman. Please bless us with your tawfiq and hidayah. Please guide this forum, its speakers and audience to greatness, peace, glory, and prosperity in this world and the hereafter. Make us responsible intellectual. Grant us with valuable knowledge that will be beneficial to mankind in order to gain your mardatillah. Make us your righteous servant that follow your commands and neglect sinful acts. Please forgive us for our wrongdoings. Ya Allah, Ya Munzil al-Barakat, bestow peace to our beloved country, Malaysia. Preserve us from any threat and disaster, either man-made or natural disaster. And to you, Ya Allah, we ask for the security and prosperity upon us, our leaders and our country. Bestow patience in us in order to face the challenges from you. Please accept our deeds and please reward us accordingly. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alamin. Thank you, Brother Khairuddin, for the dua recitation. May Allah bless our event tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, we shall continue our event with the welcoming address by our own Professor Dr. Aslam Hanif, Deputy Rector Research, Innovation and Development, IIUM. Let's invite him to give his speech. Tafadhal mashkura.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Brother Shamsul. Just a very brief welcome to our speakers, Prof. Emeritus Jomo, Mustafa Phar Beng, Director of the newly established, is it still newly? Do we still say newly? Okay, newly, yeah, established Institute for International and ASEAN Studies, and also to Mr. Thomas Daniel, who is the head of the Foreign Policy and Security Studies program at ISIS Malaysia, International Institute for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you for everyone else for coming. I think it's almost a full house. We were supposed to have, but then we circulated the YouTube link, so that may have made some people stay wherever they were and watching from home. Welcome to this session. We hope that this will be a wonderful way to end our semester. It's coming to an end, especially for the Malaysian economy class, although I think this audience goes beyond the course. We've been talking about all these things in economics. Now it would be good to try to put it in context. Yeah, Malaysia, despite whatever we do and right or wrong, or we still have to live in a bigger world. And I think this is why today's session would be a very interesting one. So looking forward to the discussion, and then later, especially to the questions that will come from all of you. Looking forward to hearing that. So with that, once again, thank you very much. And thanks to the student committee as well as those in the office for putting this together on relatively short notice. It's been a busy day today. Earlier on, we had the Attorney General who was here, and now we have this program. So thank you very much. I pass it back to Shamsul.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Aslam. So we proceed with the most awaited round, the forum itself. The topic is Malaysian Economic Forum 2026. The theme is Repositioning Malaysia in Current Global Political Economic Order. I think everyone know already regarding our role as ASEAN chairman in 2025. And then there are certain latest cases like Venezuela case. Perhaps you wanted to ask Prof. Jomo, Dr. Phar, Beng, or Mr. Thomas about their reactions and their opinions regarding that. You may ask so in the Q&A session. Before we begin, I would like to introduce their background. Just short one, okay? Bear with me. So, but this one I need to explain because his achievements are so remarkable. Professor Emeritus Dr. Jomo Kwame Sundaram, Research Advisor, Khazanah Research Institute, Fellow Academy of Science Malaysia, Emeritus Professor UM, United Nations Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, Assistant Director General, FAO, Founder Chair, International Development Economics Associates, and President Malaysia Social Science Associations. Authored, edited over 100 books, written many papers, translating 12 volumes, received 2007 Wasili Leontief Prize for advancing the frontiers of economic thought, several honorary doctorates, and the World Academy of Sciences TWAS Award in Social Sciences for 2026. Legend. Give an applause to Prof. Jomo, please. Thank you for coming, Prof. Jomo. Usually, if I invited you to come, it usually take months lah to gain your approval. So it's so easy now. All right. Next, we have our next panelist, Dr. Phar Beng, Professor of ASEAN Studies at IIUM itself, newly formed institute, distinguished scholar in ASEAN Studies and International Relations (IR), specializing in Southeast Asian security, regionalism, and diplomacy. Concurrently, Senior Research Fellow at the Asia-Europe Institute AEI in UM also. He teaches the master course on ASEAN regionalism. His book, ASEAN Peace Axioms Redefined, has been completed, final stages of publication. Is it true? Yeah. His other book on ASEAN and OSCE re-examined the case for confidence building, being reviewed for publication within the year 2. His work critically examines ASEAN institutional development, diplomatic norms, and broader Indo-Pacific security landscape. Questions about ASEAN? Perhaps better to ask the man himself. Give an applause for Dr. Phar Beng. And Thomas Daniel. Mr. Thomas Daniel, Director with Foreign Policy and Security Studies, ISIS Malaysia. Interests lie in strategic security challenge also of Southeast Asia, impacts of major power dynamics on ASEAN. looks mainly at the South China Sea dispute, political security cohesion in ASEAN, and Malaysian security and also foreign policies. He is a member of Malaysian Study Group on Myanmar, convened by University Malaya. It's always UM. Okay, he comments on these issues in local, regional, and international forums. Hold a Master of International Studies from University of Nottingham, Malaysia, and Communication and Media and Culture from University of South Australia. Wonderful achievements as well. Give an applause for Mr. Thomas Daniel. And we have our moderator, our dear Assistant Professor Dr. Riasat Amin Imon, experienced as former head of department in IIUM World Oratory and Debate Center, debate trainer, and also now Assistant Professor in our Department of Economics of the Kuliah of Economics and Management Sciences IIUM. Experienced debater, experienced trainer, and experienced moderator as well. Give an applause to Dr. Riasat, please. So now, before I begin, brothers, are you ready? Okay, not quite ready. Sisters, are you ready? Alhamdulillah. I hope you are ready for the question and answer session after the hour of the forum concludes. Now I pass to Dr. Riasat.
Okay, thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. First of all, let me just say that in addition to having such a dignified panel with us, I'm very pleased to see that most of them are, almost all the faces are students, and that's very good. And we're very glad that you're taking interest in such things. The other thing is not only our students, but it's good to see that we're going beyond economics, because, you know, we kind of lie to ourselves that everything is, you know, within an economic framework, but the reality is that, you know, it's much bigger than that. So it's good to see the topic political economy here. And so what I'll do is mostly I'll just be passing the ball here and there, just dodging everything. So what I'll be doing is I'll just do a bit of context setting before we start, just so that, you know, just to frame the issues here. So first of all, I think Malaysia has been, we'll look at it first of all from an external perspective, and then maybe we'll look at the internal. So first of all, I think Malaysia in general is the product of, maybe I would say, from use a political term, hedging, where they maintain a strategic alliance with Beijing and Washington at the same time. And that has been the traditional thing. But I think recently we've seen that there's been a decoupling between US and China. And as a result, I think there is the semiconductor supply chains are all, you know, becoming more and more independent. And there's been more battles about this. And this decoupling, people are arguing, is leading to a new world order. I don't know if there is a new world order, but I think our speakers will be able to elaborate on that. And if there is, what kind of world order is this? But not only is this about the new world order, but it's about Malaysia's place in this new world order. Does it maintain the traditional way of not taking a clear stance, managing its situation with both superpowers, right? But not only that, what is Malaysia's role, political role, for example, in ASEAN as a regional leader, right? We know that Malaysia has also been had the chairmanship, right? The ASEAN chairmanship. And we see it playing a usual role, because normally when we look at ASEAN, right, its role has always been non-interventionist politically. But now we see that its involvement in recent conflicts between ASEAN nations, right? We see it playing a more active role in that. And we can see that perhaps the ASEAN thing is going beyond economic partnership, right? It's evolving into that. So what would Malaysia's role be, you know, in the future as an ASEAN leader? And then looking more internally, obviously, like Malaysia's success until now, moving from a commodity exporter to, you know, more manufacturing and semiconductor, right? We see that also domestic policies are very important. And I think internally, right, the ringgit stability has been an issue. household debt 89%, right? Which is the second highest in the region, right? Climate-induced national debt, I think, is becoming a more and more important issue, right? A lot of, as climate crises increase, right, a lot of government spending is getting into that area. So climate-generated poverty is becoming an issue. We can see that Malaysia is trying to attract investment, but is it the right kind of investment that it's attracting, right? And leading to that is the idea of, Malaysia is kind of stuck. We're in a middle income trap and we're trying to get out of it. So how does this world order connect to us moving out of that trap? How do we move to an economy of complexity, more complex production, right? Also, job creation is becoming an issue, right? Everybody knows with the emergence of AI, right? It's coming more and more into our space. Then the issues of inequality as well. So these would be some of the domestic challenges. And given those domestic challenges, well, how does the Malaysian government move forward? Should it become more interventionist? Should it rely more on the free market? Right? So those are some of the challenges. And, fortunately, right, we have perspectives from, I would say, the perfect group of people, our panelists, right? Because Professor Emeritus Jomo, he's a development economist with UN experience, and he knows the Malaysian history and policy very well. We also have Professor Dr. Phar with us, right, who's a regional strategist who focuses on ASEAN dynamics. And also we have Mr. Thomas, of course, right, who's the security analyst in examining geopolitical forces as well. So I think we're in very capable hands. So given that context, I think what we'll do is I'll hand over the floor to Professor Jomo. He will be speaking for 25 minutes based on some of the slides he's already shared with us. So our media team, are we ready with the slides? Yeah, okay. All right, so the slides are there. Professor Jomo, I'll pass the floor to you. So the next 25 minutes are yours.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
These greetings of peace have become routine. We greet each other all the time without thinking very much about the significance of peace. And I think it's living in the world which we live in. I think it's extremely important that we begin to think seriously about how to create the conditions for lasting peace and how to preserve those conditions in very challenging times. And this, of course, is easier said than done. Allow me to, can we change the slide, please? What I'm going to do is relatively short. Professor Aslam suggested that I give you the outline, and so it's easier for me to refer to the notes. But what I'm going to start off with, I think it's very important for us. Nobody takes any of the economics which we have seriously anymore. There is no consensus in economics, and the pretensions of economic teaching to offering a view of economics which is shared is really not taken very seriously. So I think it's important for us to begin with something which we might agree on, and that's history. And particularly relevant is economic history. And if you look at the Nobel Committee, and I don't like the Nobel Committee for many of the prizes, especially when, almost like Orwell, peace means war. You give a prize to a person for starting war. Remember, quite some years ago, Mr. Obama got the prize even before he became president, and then proceeded to bomb about 7 countries. Abiy Ahmed got the prize and then proceeded to start a civil war within his own country as well as with the neighboring countries. So we have a terrible record of the Nobel Prize in economics, for peace in recent times. But recently, if you look at the prize for economics, most of it is quite a number have been given to economic historians. And this is, I think, is quite useful. And it's very important reminder, because if you look at the 21st century, the main person who has been writing about the economic history in this country is none other than the Sultan of Perak. Whatever one might think about his books, he has challenged us. He has written over 1,600 pages, okay, published by Oxford University Press on economic history. And yet, very few reviews have actually appeared of the 3 volumes he has published. So I would strongly urge you that what is non-contentious is actually economic history, or at least less contentious. So I'm going to run through very quickly the economic history of this country, and in almost very glibly giving you one sentence summaries. So I would start off with the first Prime Minister of this country, Tunku Abdul Rahman, and basically describe his economic policy attitude as essentially neo-colonial. British colonies, British interests were not at all touched, not at all upset. And I want to emphasize the significance of this. In the first half decade after the end of World War II, a Malayan contribution to the foreign exchange earnings of the entire sterling zone, that means the entire British Empire, was 70%. Foreign exchange earnings just from tin and rubber alone came to 70% of, now you have to understand, of course, that Britain was badly bombed by the Nazis, and it was devastated and so on and so forth. But 70% from one economy alone. So one has to realize that part of the reason we didn't get independence together with the British Empire in South Asia, which got independence basically around 1947, whether it's Sri Lanka or Pakistan or India and so on, was basically the significance of this colony. So for people to say that, oh, we were not colonized, which is unfortunately the case, is very sad. So if you think about the second Prime Minister, I'm running through this very, very quickly. The second Prime Minister, I would say he was probably the only quasi-nationalist we have had in the years since independence. And he also had a strong commitment to redistribution, captured in the new economic policy, which commits to eradication of poverty on the one hand, and the reduction of economic identification with ethnicity. Okay, and that was, of course, a very important move, and given the history of this country. Now, the third Prime Minister, who has been probably the most consequential Prime Minister we have had in this country, has been, of course, Mahathir, who went to hospital today after a fall at home. And Tun Mahathir, of course, is probably going to go down in history as the modernist Prime Minister. He had a very modernist vision of the country, and he associated this very much with industry, with manufacturing. And he was committed to it. One may disagree with how he went about doing it, but this was his commitment. And so you have also, during his watch, the development of the basic institutions of what many Malaysians refer to as cronyism. And also, he had this view that in order to develop, you needed to keep wages down. And so a cheap labor policy was part of his view. And worse than that, he basically reduced the kind of very weakly redistributive policies which had been introduced during the Razak era, particularly during the 1970s, and basically reduce income tax burden and so on and so forth. So the kind of tax structure we have in this country is quite regressive, and it goes back to this period, and particularly the reforms of the late Tun Daim from 1984. Now, the subsequent period, of course, has seen some corrections of some of these policy errors on agriculture. For example, Tun Mahathir was not at all interested in agriculture. There's been some greater efforts on agriculture, particularly in food and so on and so forth. And then we have seen some quasi-Singaporean type public sector reform of getting the public sector run along private sector lines. very much following what was happening in the rest of the world. If you think about, for example, Mrs. Thatcher, and if you think about Al Gore and his recommendations as far as so-called the new public management were concerned, this was very much But in any case, you have, especially during the Najib period, a turn back to the West, and a turn back to the West, which was quite significant. So, and some very, very significant developments, which I don't have time to elaborate on, but you might be interested in asking questions about later. The next other things to emphasize is that during this recent period, we have seen a turn to fiscal conservatism, no deficit spending. And this has basically been the hallmark of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of the current government. But at the same time, you have some interesting new promises, but really not very much actual progress of green industrial policy, and also some talk about getting rid of poverty and some progressive redistribution. But I would emphasize that much of it has remained largely at the rhetorical level rather in terms of serious policy impact and progress. So we can see that, unfortunately, in Malaysia, much of the discourse on all these issues is colored by the big thing, which is ethno-populism. So you do not have a serious understanding of what is behind all this, but everything is seen through a rather ethnic lens, and so we have a very poor understanding of policy in this country as a consequence of that. Can I have the next? Oh yeah. Okay. Now, the next thing I think which is relevant for us to think about is that many people would like to think that with the end of colonialism came the end of imperialism. And in this country especially, you have people, historians, who have basically taken the view of denying that Malaysia was even colonized. Okay, and so on. I don't want to get into all those debates right now, but I think it's important for us to recognize that over the course of the first half of the 20th century, there was a very significant transition from the British hegemony to American hegemony. And that can be, there's so much evidence for that. I don't need to elaborate on the obvious, but I think it's also important to recognize the next major transition which takes place as far as international geopolitics are concerned, and that is with the end of the Cold War at the end of the 1980s, the demise of the Soviet Union, and the emergence of what Foreign Affairs Journal celebrated as the rise of sovereigntism, or what other people call unipolar world. Now, all this basically meant that the various institutions which were created by Roosevelt in anticipation of the end of the Second World War, particularly the institutions of multilateralism, these are very different, I want to emphasize, from what Wilson had pushed after the end of the First World War, which was much more imperial in many ways. And this decline of multilateralism has also been reflected, for example, in the increasing irrelevance of the United Nations, the increasing irrelevance of the World Trade Organization. But I think it's useless for us to bemoan how irrelevant the UN has become and so on and so forth, without recognizing that the UN is really the only, so as Churchill would say, democracy is probably the worst system of politics you can have, if not for all the alternatives. So likewise, I think it's important to recognize that the best thing which we have is really multilateralism, as flawed as it has been in practice. Now, there was an Italian thinker who died almost a century ago, who said, what we have at that time, and he was talking about the rise of fascism in Italy, you have the death of the old order, the decline and death of the old order, but the new order could not be born. And in this period between the death of the old order and the failure of the emergence of the new order, you have an interregnum. And during this interregnum, you have a time for monsters. And it is these monsters which emerge, which of course became a statement for the rise of fascism and the forces which led to the Second World War, but also a whole range of other phenomena. And so I think it might be useful for us to think about Gramsci's insight, particularly in relation to what has happened in the recent period since the end of the First Cold War. Now, let me just say a little bit about Mr. Trump and Trump 2.0 in particular, okay? Because I think it's important for us to recognize that this is not Trump 1.0 plus. Okay, this is Trump 2.0, and it's a very different situation. And what we have seen is a desire by Mr. Trump to keep everybody on their toes, not to be anticipated, and so on and so forth. And this has led to a great deal of uncertainty. And part of the result of this has been a great indecision as to making investment decisions, which are of course crucial to, if you don't have investments, you don't have growth. And as a result of that, the other forces of stagnation have only become much worse as a consequence. Another factor, of course, has been his desire for conflict, or for not only conflict but for winning. And this, of course, is been most Mr. Trump, of course, is not at all reluctant to talk about his own inclinations, and he has renamed the Defense Department the Department of War, and so on and so forth. Now, when I was studying economics, and I suspect even when Professor Aslam was studying economics, we often talked about economics in terms of a choice between producing guns or butter. And of course, everybody agreed that butter was a much better choice for humanity. But now, this is not the case. Not only the US, but much of Europe has now turned to producing guns. And for example, just as an example, in Stuttgart, where Mercedes builds its cars, there used to be three assembly lines. Two of the lines are still functioning to produce cars. The third line is now used to produce Leopard tanks. Okay, and Chancellor Merz of Germany celebrates this. He says this will be the new basis for growth in Europe, and especially in Germany, with what he calls military Keynesianism. Now, he comes out of Goldman Sachs, but nonetheless, it is frightening that people see economic growth as coming out of military production, something which would have been unthinkable for my generation of people studying economics from about half a century ago. Now, another very important development is this kind of mythology that somehow or other reducing taxes on the rich would be very good for growth. So Mr. Arthur Laffer, and I used to call him the laughable curve, he developed a curve, and there's absolutely no evidence. The chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under Ronald Reagan was a man named Martin Feldstein, who's now Professor Emeritus of the National Bureau of Economic Research, previously a professor at Harvard. And Feldstein has basically demonstrated there's absolutely no evidence. In fact, the evidence is to the contrary to Arthur Laffer's claims. And that's why he never wanted a second term as the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors to Reagan. And now you have the most prestigious award for American economics, the John Bates Clark Award, being awarded to a young Frenchman named Gabriel Zucman. And Gabriel Zucman's major work has been to show the importance of fiscal policies and to demonstrate that the alternative options are very, very eminently feasible. And this, I think, is very important for us to recognize that the world does not have to suffer the fiscal and debt crisis which we have now been subjected to. All too many countries, especially in the global south, are facing problems associated with this crisis. And the last point I want to make, which is extremely important, is the triumph of what some people call the tech bros. The tech bros refer to people like Mr. Peter Thiel, of course, the man who's going to become a trillionaire, the first trillionaire in the world over the next few days, Mr. Elon Musk. And there's a whole generation of these people, many of whom have a peculiar South African connection. And Elon Musk's grandfather, for example, was a Nazi and emigrated from Canada to South Africa because he found post-war Canada inhospitable to Nazis. And now you have countries such as South Africa being penalized for ending apartheid, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very different world. Now, Mr. Peter Thiel in 2014 wrote a very influential opinion editorial for the Wall Street Journal, where he argued, his title was "Competition is for Losers." And basically what he argued is that contrary to what most people study in economics, competition is not desirable. It's wasteful, according to him, because you're wasting time competing with each other. What you need is monopolies. More monopoly, less competition. This is his recommendation. So we are living in a world where what you thought you might have learned in your textbooks is far from the reality which people are practicing in real life. Next, please. Yes. So what we also see, Mr. Doge, the same Elon Musk we just mentioned earlier, he has cut a lot of unnecessary wasteful payments, and including research funding. So research funding by the US government has gone down, and this will basically set back US technological innovation in many ways. And it will also, of course, raise the cost of technology adoption from external sources especially, and this becomes a huge problem. Another major problem which has become a phenomenon in the early 21st century is this phenomenon called financialization and the renewed emphasis on privatization, which Mr. Trump also embodies. And then yet another issue, of course, is that Trump is unabashedly pro-America first. The rest of the world really does not matter. The fact that America is the most powerful economy in the world does not really matter. And he has an ideology of what many people term transactionalism. But what is transactionalism? So if those of you who have learned a little bit of game theory, it is basically assumes a zero-sum game. So if you have a zero-sum game, and Professor Aslam and I are involved in a zero-sum game, that means that nothing more will be created, right? So if I am to gain, it will be at his expense. If he is to gain, it has to be at my expense. So this is the mentality of the art of the deal. This is the underlying view. So when you talk about transactionalism, think of zero-sum game. The possibility that you will have a positive sum game does not exist in the book for these people who rule the world right now. Then, of course, we have the racist rhetoric, which is associated with MAGA and so on and so forth. Of course, non-white people are going to be deported in increasing numbers. He is talking about already 100 million people being extradited from the US. And let's face it, we in Malaysia, unfortunately, also have people who often espouse similar ideologies. And this is very important for us to recognize. Next, please. So, yes. Okay, so I would basically put it to you, without going into any detail, that Europe has been little better. It doesn't have the clout of the US, but it has been little better. And now, my examples would be how they handle COVID-19, how they handle international taxation, and how they handle carbon taxation. But it will take me too long, and I've run out of time. So next, please. Okay, so what are the potential strengths which we have? And I would basically argue that what we need is a new non-aligned movement for our times, which is committed to pacifism, against war, against imperialism, and positively developmental. This is the new non-alignment for our times. And the second point I would like to make is that we have to look at what is significant rather than what exists. And I would make a strong plea for what is called East Asian cooperation, particularly ASEAN +3, rather than talking about APEC and RCEP and CPTPP and IPEF and so on and so forth, and FDI facilitation and ISDS and so on and so forth. These are grossly inappropriate for the challenges of the times which we face, and therefore I would make a strong plea for this. Fine. And then the last point I would make in this connection, of course, is that the Prime Minister, in a speech, important speech, which nobody knows about because it was given in Tsinghua University in Beijing, actually made the case for an Asian monetary fund, of pushing for greater regional monetary and other cooperation, which basically means greater macroeconomic coordination. These are some of the new issues which we need to think about if we are going to move forward. Next, please. So the real point is that if we are serious about progressive change for this country, we really need to think about it not in isolation, but recognize that the world we live in is a very different world. And the fact that Malaysia has been very proud of being an open economy also means that there is a responsibility for those of us thinking about alternative economic policies to recognize the imperatives which are forced upon all of us by the fact that we are an open economy. Thank you very much for your attention. Wallahu alam. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much, Professor Jomo. 24 minutes, so we're going nicely. But yeah, we can. I think we all can see the weight of, the words and the wisdom and encyclopedic knowledge of Professor Emeritus Prof. Jomo. I think let's move on to the next speaker, which would be Professor Kim. Yeah. So 15 minutes. It's up to you. How do you want to respond directly, or come up with your own ideas? It's totally up to you. 15 minutes. Yeah. 1-5. Yeah.
First of all, it's a privilege to be invited to this event. And I also, and Assalamualaikum to every one of you. And I agree with what Professor Jomo said. There are times when we are so accustomed to using words that we no longer reflect or understand the meaning anymore. I hope whatever I'm about to say will really convey the message of peace. And one of the ways in which peace can be relayed to you is the extent to which I can make my own ideas clearer and perhaps the idea of Professor Jomo clearer. However, I'm about to confess, I will fail at the task of clarifying his idea because I grew up worshipping his idea. Professor Jomo was a legend when I was in high school, a legend when he was writing his book with Professor Edmund Terence Gomez, because on August 8, 1988, if I'm not mistaken, there was a big and massive crackdown known as Operasi Lalang. And to those of us in Form 6 back then, we were shocked by the scale of the arrest because it included so many people. Of course, the government will explain to you the reason why the operation has to be carried out is because we need political stability and economic growth. But subsequent to that, I also noticed that there were 1, 2, maybe 3 people who were willing to exercise tremendous courage to write on political economy, which I think is one of the sub-theme of this workshop or this conference. And it was Professor Jomo with Professor Edmund Terence Gomez, both of whom I hold in high regards. And therefore, it's extremely difficult for me to say anything objective other than complimentary things. Now, I do remember one conversation that Professor Jomo gave me when I was about to go to the United States for my PhD. And I was living in Subang Jaya then. Somehow I got hold of your number. And I gave you a call. I said, Prof, my name is Kim. I'm a student of International Islamic University. And I've been accepted by different institutions for my PhD. Columbia, the Divinity School, Harvard, Johns Hopkins, Notre Dame, and New School for Social Research. And I remember very clearly, you didn't really say that you should go to New School for Social Research, but you gave me the encouragement that I should lean towards the New School for Social Research. And that is actually one of the schools that constantly in New York, that constantly critique and try to understand the uneven nature of the history and the theory of economics. And in the institutional history of IU, there was one professor from Ghana, Professor Botchway, who was actually an MA and PhD graduate from New School for Social Research. And that's how the Department of Political Science and to some extent economics got its first trajectory back in 1990 and 1991. In other words, International Islamic University were willing to be more critical than most other institutions. But of course, back then, University of Malaya was just next door to us in Section 17. No matter how critical we can be, we still have to pay due deference to the works of Professor Jomo and Professor Edmund Terence Gomez. Now, what is unique about the latter is the fact that the Professor Edmund Terence Gomez himself told me, in spite of his investigative scholarship on political economy, corruption, the politics of patronage, he was never sued for any single work of scholarship. I'm not sure if Professor Jomo had the same good fortune, but to the degree that that was not the case, you won your case. I think you won all your lawsuits. Correct me if I'm wrong. You won your lawsuits, right? So, and it's not easy to win a lawsuit against towering tycoons and billionaires. And I think you won your case versus Tan Sri Vincent Tan of Vijaya. He dropped his case. So if I want to extract any lesson from this experience and episode is that when you are very careful with your scholarship, when you're very cautious with what you do or what you think, and constantly try to understand what is causality, how does A lead to B converts to A, you can actually be stronger than anyone who is tremendously wealthy out there. Now, having made that little comment allowed me to say that there is a slight disagreement between my way of thinking and Professor Jomo when it comes to how the world order is described. When you look at the slides that he presented earlier, you will see that the age of unipolarity has already ended. I disagree to the extent that there was this person, not necessarily savory, because he was also the same scholar who espoused the idea of clash of civilization, Samuel Huntington. But soon after he wrote the book, the paper, Clash of Civilization, he also produced another article which has been missed by most of the political scientists and economists over the last 35 to 40 years. And that is the international system that the United States won is not necessarily unipolar per se, but uni-multipolar. In other words, when United States is on top of the world, assuming this is the world, even though it's not round, United States is on top, and then the rest of the poles, whether you are a permanent member of United Nations Security Council, say United Kingdom, France, China, Russia, at one stage Soviet Union, you are supposed to oblige and obey whatever that comes out of Washington, D.C. Now, the reason why I believe that uni-multipolarity still exists is because of events emerging from October 7 and also Ukrainian war, wars that can't seem to be stopped because there is vested interest in certain segments of the global population that do not want to stop those wars. Within the context of International Islamic University, I think you might be more interested in understanding why the Gaza war has not truly stopped. I refer to that as the domination of two groups, that's American Israeli Public Lobby, and to some extent Christian Zionists, control of what I refer to as 4 Ws: Washington, D.C., White House, the white screen, whatever you watch, whatever you consume from TV, the soft power that guides your morality, that tries to alter your compass on what is right and wrong, and finally, Wall Street. When the Muslim world is not in control of any one of the 4 Ws, it is extremely difficult to change or flip the international system. And that is the reason why we witnessed what we saw a few days ago, the blunt and direct kidnap of President Maduro and his wife from Venezuela, regardless of the nature of their character and whatnot. And it has happened before with Noriega in Panama. It has also happened in the form of President Ferdinand Marcos and his wife being chased out of Philippines in 1986, if I'm not mistaken, even though the circumstances were different. What I'm trying to say is that the Cold War, even if it has ended, or even if it is continuing in the second version, still has the characteristics and defining feature of a uni-multipolarity. At the risk of being crude, it's basically United States saying, up yours. And that's the briefest definition of uni-multipolarity. And if we want to be a little bit more diplomatic by quoting what President Donald Trump has said, I think he is the first living leader who said that I do not trust friends and foes, especially friends. And he gets away with it. And precisely for that reason, the system that has been built from 1945 onwards and whatnot are completely out of whack. And of course, United Nations is not a perfect system, but nonetheless, it's there for a reason. And the reason why I need to explain United Nations is because United Nations is also the fount and the source in which the rest of the regional organizations come to be. Many people assume that when you have ASEAN, when you have Gulf Cooperation Council or South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SARC, or any regional organization, they are entities independent unto themselves. They are not, because there is the UN Charter, and the likes of ASEAN, for instance, draw and extract some of the values from the principles and the language of that charter. So there is always that connection between UN and regional organization. In fact, it's almost a culture, if I'm not mistaken. UN Secretary General will meet with all the Secretary General of regional organizations at least once a year, and that includes the Secretary General of OIC. At least there is that practice that I know of. Now, why is it important for me to say that the world remains uni-multipolar? Because there are so many anomalies where you mentioned one. When you were trained as an economist with Professor Aslam, there was this issue of opportunity cost, guns versus barter. But there are also many anomalies in my field of political science and international relations. Wars usually do stop and always stop But over the last few years, we have wars that just continue indefinitely, whether it's Gaza, Ukraine, and somewhere else. They seem to be coming at the world in waves. And that leads to my concern on what Professor Jomo said earlier. How do we bring about peace? How do we actually encourage more scholars, students, economics major to focus on peace? Now, in terms of causality, I would assume that economics and development coexist very closely. But there's also the concept of human development that which I think was conceptualized by Mahmud al-Haq, adopted by United Nations, that has been neglected completely. Now, having said all of that, I think, have I used up all my 15 minutes? Yeah. Having said all of that, once again, I would like to say that I will always be a student of Professor Jomo because of the courage and the strength of character that he has shown very early in his career. I was fortunate to be at his inaugural lecture when he was given the professorship at University of Malaya. I was there. I think Professor Wong Gong-Wu was also there, and you invited me as a student. And I also remember bringing the likes of Shariman Lokman, who is now at ISIS Malaysia, to one of your classes on East Asian regionalism. And even back then, so Shariman is the director of research in ISIS. And just to recap one moment, when Professor Jomo refers to the importance of East Asian regionalism or ASEAN monetary unit, was it?
Asian Monetary Fund.
Asian Monetary Fund, right. Asian Monetary Fund was actually an idea to some extent that came from Japan. Or maybe Asian Monetary Fund was an idea that was closely connected to Asian Currency Unit, ACU, which also came from Japan. There have been occasions when the likes of even Mahathir have basically handed regional leadership to Japanese prime ministers, encouraging them to speak up in G7, and if they cannot speak up in G7, focus on what they can contribute in East Asian Economic Caucus, or East Asia, which was originally East Asian Economic Group, EAEG. But then Japan somehow tend to walk away from those responsibilities. To the degree that Japan hasn't done it, Mahathir has also offended the likes of Suharto by going to Beijing directly to encourage Prime Minister Li Peng in 1990 to embrace and accept the idea of East Asian Economic Group. But that idea was also heavily criticized by former Secretary of State James Baker, writing in the pages of Foreign Affairs. So when you look at the extent to which an idea can be pushed forward, another idea can be pushed back, you'll then begin to understand that there is tremendous resistance against whatever Africans and Asians might want to say. But then, having said so, it's also encouraging to know that events such as Bandung Conference in 1955, if I'm not mistaken, led to the consensus of two basic ideas: no colonialism and no imperialism, from the 16 delegations. And then from there, we went into non-aligned movement in 1961. So when Professor Jomo, and I think the reason why you were named Jomo is because your father was a fan of Jomo Kenyatta, the independence liberator in Kenya. And so all of you who are here in this room are actually looking at a legacy, not just a legend. And if you want to live in a better world, then obviously you need to strengthen your scholarship in economics. in development studies, but ultimately also you have to pay some attention to political economy and international relations. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Professor Kim. So I think just to take stock of where we are, the idea of a new world comes from creating a new non-aligned movement consisting of East Asian countries. But the challenge is that we live in a multipolar world, which will probably, it's hard to move against that. So I think student of economics, a multipolar world could be seen probably in like terms like an oligopolistic situation, right? Where you have major countries with the power and small ones just not being able to do anything. They play a follower role. Anyway, not to waste any more time, let's move straight to our third panelist, Mr. Thomas. So like I said, up to you to engage however you please. Another 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Greetings to all of you. A very good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank Prof. Aslam for the invitation. It's been many years since before COVID actually that I was last at UIA, so it's good to be back. Maybe Moderator, when I'm 2 minutes out from 15 minutes, you can verbally just cue me so I can wrap it up. I must start by saying that it is a profound honor to share a panel with both Prof. Jomo and Dr. Phar for different reasons. Prof. Jomo was the former Tun Hussein chair at ISIS, and you joined just after ISIS completed a very controversial national impact assessment on Malaysia joining the TPP then, which soon became the TPP, the CPTPP. When I think back about those days, it seems as if, forget a different time, it was almost a different world that we operated in. Dr. Phar is a very prolific writer on contemporary issues, but he also was my lecturer. He took two guest lecture classes when I was doing my master's at the University of Nottingham many years ago. So it's always a bit daunting to be on a panel with one of your teachers. Now, I am not an economist, far from it. I look at foreign policy, but that said, the fundamental thrust of Malaysia's foreign policy is very much based on international trade. Our positions in global supply chains, policies to attract quality investments, which has strong domestic ripple effects. As we approach, Trump's tariffs, continued engagement with China on a range of issues, they always encapsulate this nexus of trade, security, and foreign policy. So it's impossible not to talk about trade. Earlier you mentioned that if those of you in the economic school think that everything is about economics, well, a good number of people in the foreign policy establishment like to think that everything is about foreign policy and you can divorce trade from it. But that's not the case for Malaysia, I think. So I have 3 points to make. I will try to be as brief as possible. And 3 points, at least, on how I think a foreign policy conversation comes in when we talk about repositioning Malaysia in the current geopolitical economy order. The first point is that trade and diplomacy are our main tools for preserving national interests within this evolving geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. If you look at the Wisma Putra website, or at least official Wisma Putra language on Malaysian foreign policy prerogatives, they talk not just about trade, but they talk about the interconnectedness of that trade with our geography, that this country straddles two very important maritime routes. Depending on which source you want to quote about Malaysia's trade as a percentage to GDP, the common figures that come up is about 132 to 137% for 2023 and 2024. And that figure, as I understand it, because I periodically look at it, has always been relatively quite high. That average has been high. In a Lloyd's report from October 2025, it stated that Malaysia has a very historically high trade openness of about 133% based on data that they have for the past 64 years. So it's not just trade, it's the movement of people and services, right? Tourism revenue contributed 15% of the GDP in 2024, which was up from 2023, and given the record numbers of tourism and record numbers of spending we had last year, it's probably going to grow again. So what this means is that, at least on where I sit, Malaysia is, we are rich, and to use that term very subjectively, we are rich not because of huge internal markets or not because of consumption figures. We do well because we trade with the world, and we are we are a relatively open economy. So how do we protect these conditions? How do we protect them externally? We can't rely on defense or military deterrence because that ability has severely been degraded from the 1980s. So we can't project power to defend our interests via force. I suspect that some strategic thinkers in this country in positions of power have long accepted this reality and believe that resources are better spent elsewhere. So as this geopolitical and geoeconomic order continues to evolve, we are left, I think, with trade and diplomacy, this very symbiotic relationship for us. And as the tools we can use to maximize advantages and minimize risks. And I think while we have done really well in utilizing both, the question is whether we will have the strategic space to utilize both as effectively. My second point is I would like to talk briefly about some of the issues, I think, external and perhaps internal issues that would impact our geopolitical and geoeconomic positioning. So I start with Southeast Asia, the region where we are. I think the issues of instability in ASEAN are many and obvious. There's South China Sea, there's Myanmar, there's the border war between Cambodia and Thailand. I won't get into each one. If you have questions, you can ask me during the Q&A. Some of these we can insulate ourselves from, others we can't because we're directly involved or we suffer the ripple effects. And I think while ASEAN has made real progress on things like the Community Vision 2045, the group remains very fragmented on some issues, differences between member states, in terms of diverging geopolitical orientations, in terms of differing level of economic interdependence, differing security priorities. These very realistically, and very expectedly undermines the ability of ASEAN to act cohesively as a unified political force. For those of you who have followed Prime Minister Anwar's remarks, he gave lots of ASEAN speeches last year, but a key message that he kept re-emphasizing was that ASEAN centrality, ASEAN loves to talk about centrality. He kept emphasizing that ASEAN centrality cannot be taken for granted nor endlessly repeated. It must be earned and re-earned. And I think that is particularly important. Beyond Southeast Asia, some of the issues that I worry about for us include a potential Taiwan Strait contingency, tensions in Southeast Asia, especially between India and Pakistan, but also Bangladesh, the evolving dynamics between Washington and Beijing, perhaps Tokyo. My personal impression is that among very senior policymakers in this country, there is a line of thinking that conflict, especially large-scale conflict, is unlikely as too many have too much to lose, or that rational thinking, rational policymaking will not lead to conflict or military conflict, to be precise. I used to think that too. I think conflicts elsewhere around the world have made me reassess. I think it would be very prudent for Malaysia to plan for the worst. Something that you guys might want to keep an eye out for in Q1 is there will be a report released by an international think tank on the economic impact to several Southeast Asian countries, including Malaysia, based on two permutations of a conflict in Taiwan. Some of the figures that they have are quite astounding. I'm sure these figures will be debated, but the report should be out by Q1 this year. Now, compounding, these are points that have been mentioned by Prof. Jomo and Dr. Phar, that trade and investment is now is very much weaponized, not just by the major powers. You have these narratives of spheres of influence that is still very much present. I think it was just today morning or yesterday night that the State Department uploaded this infographic of Trump saying that that entire region is theirs. I sent it to someone in State Department, and this person replied with a meme. It just tells you, even for people within the system, how crazy things have become. I have another point here on what I think is another issue that could really potentially impact us, which is the disruptive impact of AI, but I'm going to skip that. If you guys have questions, you can please ask me. But I think some of my colleagues at ISIS have really been trying to highlight this to people in government that essentially, not if, but when AI is adopted on a large scale, the impact to jobs in this country is going to be tremendous, and there will be ripple effects because, as we all know in this country, every issue is very quickly diverted to an ethnic political issue, and it will create broader problems for us. These are all external issues, but I think they are. But as we know, all foreign policy is rooted in domestic realities, and I think that Malaysian foreign policy prerogatives have increasingly been affected by domestic demands and politics. When I started this 10 years ago, so very minor steps compared to my panelists. But 10 years ago, when I started, it was still very common to hear that foreign policy is the preserve of the elite. I think that has really changed, right? It's changed, not completely turn around, but it's changed. Issues like the South China Sea, issues like how we approach Myanmar, refugees in Malaysia, relations with the US and China, relations with countries in the Middle East, our tone on Palestine and Gaza, all these really now, they increasingly matter to political leaders because they matter to voters and because political parties do not have that guarantee of continued rule anymore. You can lose elections in this country now. You can have changes of government. So on issues that I particularly watch, like the South China Sea, for example, it's very interesting to see that more and more Malaysians are asking, whether it's in social media or letters, they are asking why are they learning about developments in the South China Sea through an international press report, and why is Wisma Putra always responding to a development and not making an announcement per se. Why is the Ministry of Defense issuing a press statement in one way about the South China Sea, and Wisma Putra takes a very different approach? So these are questions that are being asked, and I think while it's great that we have more accountability from policymakers, that is a good thing. I also must admit that at times I think this really narrows the strategic wiggle space for Malaysian policymakers, and there will be the inevitable conflation of national and political interests. We saw that recently, and we will see that in terms of how this government engages the United States and the Trump administration in particular. It will continue for the next 2 years or so, especially since we're entering an election cycle. My second last point is, my third point is, if we are indeed heading into an Asia-Pacific and a world order that's fluctuating in ways that it's very difficult to predict, what it requires is adaptability, agility, and perseverance. And is Malaysia ready for that? My view, and perhaps Prof. Jomo might disagree, is that I think the bureaucracy and the political class so far have been acutely aware of the need for Malaysia to be adaptable in a changing geopolitical and geoeconomic order. I think the political leaders that we have had till now have been aware of this. They have also had the luxury of being able to say one thing to Malaysians and do something else in terms of foreign policy. But I think that space is shrinking. So maybe this luxury will not be there anymore. I personally use the term that Malaysia has been very promiscuous in our foreign policy and strategic engagements. We get into bed with anyone as long as it suits us, and there's not much of a domestic backlash. But if domestic political permutations change, then this will change too. We have always tried to hedge between the US and China. We have always tried to engage both. But could future leaders find their choices limited because of their political inclinations or the demands of their core voter base? And it's not just the US or China. The same applies to other countries too. India, Pakistan, I think, will be an issue. Don't forget, right, in 2019, Delhi imposed a de facto palm oil embargo on Malaysia. At that time, our biggest consumer of palm oil, and still one of our biggest consumers of palm oil, and only ended that embargo when the government fell in not long after March in 2020. Similarly, the issues between the Saudis and Emeritus, we will try our best to insulate ourselves, but there will be ripple effects that we have to keep our eyes out for. The Taiwan Strait issues, I do not think. Thank you. I don't think we are immune. I don't think we can fully be insulated. Okay. One last point. I think the government has attempted to use, since we just chaired ASEAN, I think the government has attempted to use ASEAN to emphasize Malaysia's ability and agility for both the national and the regional interests. I think it's not a perfect chairmanship, but we were relatively successful despite very real fragmentation within ASEAN. You saw the expansion of ASEAN engagements to include Brazil and South Africa as guests of the chair. I think these countries represent more than just rotating G20 and BRICS chairmanships, right? They symbolize a broader voice of a global South that's seeking a more equitable and just international order. If you remember back at the May summit, we tried to convene this really interesting thing called the ASEAN GCC China Summit. The ultimate impact of that is another conversation, but at least it was an attempt by Malaysia to push forward new engagements at a time where traditional engagements with Brussels, with DC, with Beijing, are still important, but have changed and have become fundamentally more risky. So I see this as us not abandoning established mechanisms, but rather trying to diversify. So to conclude, I've cheated and put another point in my conclusion. To conclude, let me conclude with this. Actually, this was a conversation I had in December with some colleagues, right, on whether Malaysia, in this evolving world order, whether Malaysia is a price taker or could we be a norm setter? Now, I mentioned this because, again, I think in conversations with people in government, the thinking is that Malaysia has always been a price taker, right? So we take a very realist view of things. Small country, middle size at most. So you are very realistic in what you do. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that because I think we need to be realistic. That there are very real limitations that shape our trade and export-driven economy, whether it's in commodities or manufactured goods, the lack of deterrence to uphold our interests. And while we do punch above our weight, we don't make the rules. Yet, I think there is also a sense that I think we need to stop thinking ourselves as just a price taker, that we do have some strengths, we do have some influence, maybe not alone, but together with others. And then when you apply this realistically and strategically, you can perhaps reinforce norms, reinforce the norms you want to keep and tweak the norms you want to change. I hesitate to use the word whether middle power influence. I personally think it's a pointless discussion of whether Malaysia is a middle power or not. I just think we need to do and stop thinking about what we are or are not. But I think we can through diplomacy, through coalition building, through niche leadership, through identifying new opportunities and norms, like what Prof. Jomo ended his presentation with, that there are options for us to set norms together with other people. I think this government rhetorically has tried to do some of that, but let's see how it goes over the next 2 years, because I think we're going to become a bit more inward looking as we move towards election cycle. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Thomas. I think, so we started with a vision of how to move forward. Then we talked about, how there's going to be a lot of pushback. And now we're talking about maneuvering and a very realist view of things. So I think we have a spectrum of views here. I think, Mr. Thomas, you brought an interesting point, but you didn't want to delve too deep into it, which was the issue of AI. But I think we're all kind of curious about everyone's views here on that. And you did mention the Malaysian perspective, how AI might, be how it might maybe restructure the job market, and initially there'll be some pain. But I'm also curious about Professor Jomo's view on how globally, because in development economics, when I'm teaching my students, I tend to tell them that, look, there's be a global consolidation, and this is a new level of capitalism, right? Where AI is actually leading to more capital concentration. So I just wanted to know your views on this issue, especially at a global scale, how AI might lead to consolidation of even more power of the powers that be. So yeah. So yeah. And then yeah.
Very much. Thank you very much. I I think the question of AI is a huge issue. There are no simple issues. I think from in terms of artificial intelligence, there are basically two different types of approaches towards thinking about AI. There's an assumption of certain rationality in large language models, and the large language models tend to reproduce it. So if you, for example, have your input with the ChatGPT and all the other Western-based things, you get certain assumptions about what constitutes rationality and so on and so forth. Now, if you go, for example, to DeepSeek, which is free, you get a different view of the world. So, for example, the whole idea of the global south would be kind of poo-pooed in ChatGPT. But you get a very different view when you look at go to DeepSeek, for instance. So a lot of it incorporates many of the biases we already have in society. The unfortunate thing is that we think that there are no biases, or we assume away the biases, and this is a very dangerous problem which we have. Now, the current problem, of course, is that hundreds of billions have been invested in AI on the assumption that AI would yield hundreds of billions. And this is why when when DeepSeek was released early last year, it frightened Wall Street, because you no longer, instead of having to pay for ChatGPT or the other kinds of services, you basically could use, you could use DeepSeek or some of the others as well. And then the question becomes, how are you going to get your returns to those hundreds of billions which have already been invested? So it poses a very severe problem. I have a friend, a former Greek finance minister, who was here last year and talked about techno-feudalism. I don't think that's a very useful way of looking at it, because I think feudalism has its own dynamics, and so there are a lot of people who have their own favorite take on how to understand AI. But I was saying earlier, you have machine learning, okay, where the machine learning assumes building on large language models and the learning through those large language models. It's been with us for a long time, except that now it is much more widespread, and it has bigger and bigger implications, because initially we always suspected bias, and that those suspicions of bias are now gone. So we find that a lot of people, will come and tell me, "Oh, ChatGPT told me this authoritatively, neutral." There's no sense that there is a bias inherent in it. So this becomes hugely problematic. So, for example, if you go to ChatGPT and ask about, say, Venezuela, you will get a view about Venezuela. You can't have so much oil. The largest deposits of oil and gas in the world are almost 20% of the oil known reserves in the hands of Venezuela. The Americans have a right. Okay, now and those things are not questioned, right? So you have a lot of inherent biases in AI. So I think you can discuss AI at many different levels as investment and so on and so forth. But the other type of AI, which is very important, are neural networks. So when AI is built on neural networks, it no longer assumes the kind of rationality which you have from large language models. So with neural networks, for example, you might assume, you no longer assume a certain kind of fixed rationality. And that has huge implications in terms of what the findings are. Okay, so going back to, for example, transactionalism, it has very different implications in terms of what comes out of your game theoretic assumptions. So I think I don't even know where to begin to discuss AI. I'm not even sure that's what you meant when you asked the question. But I think it is very important for us to have a national conversation about AI. But I think what we need to do is to demystify a lot. I mean, there is, you go to any chat group and say, oh, I checked Chat GPT, or I checked whatever their favorite thing is. And, I must admit that I use AI because there is so much information right now. Okay, I wrote a piece today on de-dollarization. Okay. And there's so much information on de-dollarization. How do I summarize all that information? So I have to use the AI to summarize a lot of information, but I use three different and in fact somebody said, oh, only three. Why don't you use more? And so on and so forth. And I mean, there's a limit to what I can do, right? Because I'm writing a piece every 2 weeks, and I'm trying to write something original. And so I use it to summarize, but I'm always very conscious of the inherent biases, but I'm sure that I can only guess at many of the inherent biases. I cannot guess at the other inherent biases. And I find it's very easy, for example, the plagiarism checks. It's very easy to get around the plagiarism checks. I can plagiarize myself and not be caught by the plagiarism check, because I use words differently. I put the clause and because it's a language model, right? So you get stuck in a lot of these things. So I think it's very important for us to have that conversation about AI, its potential, but also its limitations, and to get away from this kind of almost cult-like worship of AI, because that I think is extremely dangerous, because it's just like, somebody says, oh, in theory, I mean, we have this bias all the time. For example, earlier when I was listening to Thomas, this whole question of, if you look at the discussion last year, right, about, I have not seen any conventional economists find a single so-called free trade agreement which they didn't like. Every free trade agreement is wonderful, and obviously it can't be. And the Mahaguru of trade liberalization, a man named Jagdish Bhagwati, who is got his own prejudices and so on, and he's very blatant about it. But Jagdish Bhagwati himself says that anything less than multilateral, truly multilateral trade liberalization is actually grossly inferior and, more importantly, biased. Because when you are trying to get people to agree to something, the superior force will say, oh, I agree to this, but not to this, and so on and so forth. So you have all kinds of inherent biases and so on. So likewise with AI, likewise with the large language models and so on and so forth. And I don't know enough about the algorithms and so on and so forth, which are often inherent in this, and I don't doubt the ability of AI to learn, but I am very concerned about the inherent biases and the fact that a lot of people using AI are not self-conscious about the inherent biases of what they are using, And for example, if you go to a Zionist meeting, okay, you go there and your eyes are very wide open, right? But if you go to a Muslim meeting and then you have competing views, what then? Okay, you take, for example, 10 years ago, or was it 11 years ago, Malaysia joined a 40-country task force to attack and overthrow the government of Yemen. Okay? And now we know that not only the Prime Minister, but also one of his ministers received a great deal of money. Right? Now, Is our foreign policy for sale? Okay. Or to use a different example, during, I think, 2020, the new government, after Sheraton move, didn't have much legitimacy. So Michael Pompeo, Secretary of State, and in the line of succession in the event that anything happens to the president, he was trying to make his bid. So Pompeo basically calls up the then new prime minister and says, let's have joint naval patrols in the South China Sea. The prime minister was so happy, okay? Because suddenly the Secretary of State of the United States was calling him personally, okay? But he was, and he had in Washington been trying to persuade Donald Trump to start a little war, because he reminded Donald Trump, Mrs. Thatcher beat Michael Foot in the 1982 elections, 83 or 82 elections, by starting a war in the Falkland Islands. George W. Bush was losing in the polls, started the war with Iraq. The fact of the matter was that there was no weapons of mass destruction, but started a war and got re-elected president. So you can see the utility of having wars. So Pompeo was trying to persuade Trump. Now, Trump, in his braggadocio, yeah, he said, "Oh, people love me. I'm going to get a second term. I don't need to have this little war." And he took himself very seriously as a peace president. Remember, okay, at that time. And he said that. So he didn't buy for it, because Pompeo was offering him two wars. Either start a war in the South China Sea, or, no, he offered him 5 wars. Either South China Sea, or he was talking about Iran as a possibility. No way are we going to go around and mess around with Iran. Russia, no way. That was ruled out. But these, third world countries like Venezuela and Malaysia, why not? These fellas are, kucing kurap, So that basically that was the view which prevailed. So we were saved from war, but not by our leaders. Okay? So you think through the implications of that. Where do you get that in international relations theory, right? Yeah. So it is extremely important for us to recognize that even international relations are subject to corruption. And I think Thomas made a very good point about the relationship between diplomacy and trade. But I want to make a point that, maybe we should start thinking seriously in this country about having a MOFAT, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Too much of vested interest. Yeah, exactly. But if you look at Brazil, one of the most competent diplomatic corps in the entire South, or if you look at even Australia, relatively small country, they have a MOFAT. Korea, they can punch above their weight, partly because they have, so you don't have so many people running around all over the world, spending a lot of money on them. You really get value for money, with your MOFAT. So these are some of the things which, I think, Thomas, in your presentation, you basically implicitly, I think, we really need to rethink things. You're absolutely right about vested interests. I mean, in many countries, this is precisely the kind of, and there are problems with that. You go to Brazil, there was not a single non-white diplomat until the 21st century. Okay? Because you have number one, and then because your children go to international school, you have an inherent advantage. To get into the Brazilian diplomatic service, you have to know not only Portuguese, you need Spanish, you need English, and you need French. So four languages are a basic requirement in the late 20th century. So almost nobody, no ordinary human being, would ever get into this thing. Only one. So you have 3 generations, 4 generations of diplomats so there are problems, But I think the important thing, is that if we are serious about trying to punch above our weight, we really need to get our act together. And I think, we need to think about ways of doing so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Jomo. I think, I was gonna invite same comments as well on tech imperialism or anything to add on to what Prof. Jomo was saying.
Oh.
Yeah.
Just a point of note, one of my friends is a Brazilian diplomat. He has to pass a thesis, and he's writing one on Orientalism before he can actually be an ambassador. So it's not just 4 languages alone. You have to actually write a thesis, a critical one, very critical one.
Mr. Thomas?
No, I have no comments, but if you want to open it up to the students?
Yeah, I think, so what we'll do is maybe we'll see as many questions as we can field. So once, you're invited, just give your name, some basic details, like what department and things, all right? And then make your question short and pointed. Okay, thanks very much. So anybody? Questions? All right, there's a sister behind. Yeah, go ahead. Maybe press the button. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me? So you asked to make the question short, but I'm afraid I cannot. So my background is from sciences, and I'm recently doing my master's in economics here at IIUM. My question is a combination of all of your views, but to summarize it in one line, why do we assume value neutrality as the basis of rationality for all our decisions? To elaborate now on what the question means, when we ask questions like AI will take over jobs, what trade policy will be, all these kinds of questions, economics, like you said, there is no consensus on economics that we have. We assume it's a social science and we allow different moralities to dictate it. My question is, there is no value neutrality. Objective values are heavily determined through absolute morality. If we pretend that values are based on individual judgments, we will never reach consensus. So my question being, if we assume that, we're never going to make anything of objective value, and then we're going to have all these forums and all these differences just because we don't accept objective morality. So another point to add, will AI affect jobs? That's not the right question. The right question is, should AI be even allowed into the system in the first place, given that AI is already biased? Why are we allowing it? Why is it a given? So I hope you could answer my question.
I think Dr. Kim, right? Okay.
Well, first of all, I do have my bias in the sense that I was once asked, how would the future become or be? So allow me to just backtrack a little bit. When it comes to China-US relationship, it's a zero-sum game, not unlike what Professor Jomo said. Zero-sum in terms of what I refer to as 10 or 9 or 10 T's. So first of all, there is the issue of Taiwan, which they cannot resolve. Secondly, there is somehow this belief that it is a fight between totalitarian versus dictatorship. Again, a concept that cannot be practically resolved. Thirdly, there is the struggle over what is known as theater preponderance over South China Sea. Theater preponderance meaning who gets to be the top dog in that enclave, maritime enclave. Over East China Sea too, so that's 4T. There is also Tiananmen-like issue, such as Hong Kong, Tibet, Uyghur, And as and when interests suit them, maybe it can even include Kashmir or whatever. And how many Ts am I at right now? 6? At one stage, there was even a struggle over TikTok. And the solution to that was America need to buy it over. And even though the solution to TikTok to the Germans was actually very simple. So when the Germans were confronted, German civil servants were confronted with whether they should be allowed to use TikTok or not, they came to a very simple solution. When they go to work, they'll use the phone provided by the government. But when they want to use TikTok, then they just use the one that they have privately purchased. But then somehow or rather, when this debate is transposed to China and United States, is a huge thing. It is as if it's the red line or the trigger that can actually lead to warfare between the two. And then there's also another T refers to as the Terminal High Altitude Aerial Defense, THAAD, THAAD. The system, when deployed in Seoul, can detect electronic signals and intelligence all the way in Xinjiang. And to the Chinese, this is not fair because you are able to discern and decipher whatever that we are doing. So when people ask me, how do you understand China and United States relationship? I always refer to all these T's that cannot be resolved. Now, coming back to the international system, I believe that the international economic system, whether we like it or not, is evolving to one where it is actually dominated by AI, irrespective of what you said, automation, algorithm that we cannot precisely discern and figure out, augmented reality that may be developed to such a stage, even though Mark Zuckerberg has given up on that idea, but there's always the possibility that one day AR or virtual reality will become so sophisticated that there is no need to gather in the room. Everything can be understood and transmitted through the goggles. And apps-driven economy, we are living in it. And all the apps, all the economic transactions and whatnot. And finally, when we have all the 5 A's, we also have to understand that the world is evolving to ones where the analysis of big data or metadata is becoming increasingly important. So is it a balanced world? I don't think so, because the first world will have all the first advantages. But then I remember explaining to one person yesterday while we were having dinner, in every first world, there are third world cities. In every third world countries, there are first world capitals. In other words, the gap between the rich and poor will always be there, and it is for economics major to try to resolve the conundrum.
Okay, Mr. Thomas, would you like to respond, or Professor Jomo, to value objective morality?
The mythology of value-free economics specifically is very recent. It's less than a century old. It begins, of course, with Karl Popper and the myths of logical positivism and the pretensions of that. So you have that, and then in the 1950s, to establish economics as a science, Mr. Friedman basically tried to apply the logical positivism into economics. Okay, so basically it dates from there. And although many people didn't agree with Friedman, they were quite happy to go along with it because they liked the idea of being science. Now, the word science is a very ambiguous word because science can be science in the sense of a particular type, a particular approach, a philosophy implicit in logical positivism, or it can be knowledge. Okay, and so the understanding of science as knowledge is something which predates that, as in ilm. Okay, yeah. So it's a lot of it has got to do with the pretensions of economists as well, because after all, rather than say that you are looking at the world through the lens of your own biases, it sounds much better that, you know, I'm practicing something which is ostensibly value-free. It's driven by theory, and this is why there's this appeal of artificial intelligence as well. You know that you think it is value-free, okay, and so on. Oh, it's just driven by the algorithm. There's no bias involved, right? You know, this a very, very common attitude which we have, and so I would simply say that it is a particular view. I'm surprised it has come up in, you know, nowadays nobody teaches philosophy of science very much, or you know, and economic philosophy is not taught anywhere. I think history of economic thought is not taught in most universities in the world, and so on and so forth. So you find that these issues rarely come up, but they are very much at the center of things, and they have even applied. So, for example, a Kuhnian paradigmatic approach is very popular. So Thomas Kuhn talks about the structure of scientific revolutions, and then you have one view, and then when that view can no longer accommodate the new findings, that view breaks down, and so on and so forth. And I'm sure there are people right now, as we talk, who are now saying, well, perhaps the conventional neoclassical view of economics is no longer valid. What we need is a new kind of economics, and they'll come up with a whole the economics of fascism, for example, because, you know, before World War II, there was writing about how the rise of big capital, big business, was associated with the rise of fascism. So, you know, you don't be surprised if you find a lot of people taking advantage of this situation where there is so much doubt about knowledge, and it's that they will see an opportunity to promote, and who is going to challenge them, right? You know, and so, you know, you have, for example, I mentioned Peter Thiel earlier, who is promoting his views, and he goes to Stanford University. He pays to speak there. He's celebrated there, and so on and so forth. So you can get all his talks on YouTube, and you know, you're probably a dissenting view like yours, for example, is probably not going to see the light of day, right? So this, I think, is why I think it's extremely important to, especially in this day and age, to enhance our critical conscience, okay? Because conscience, as you know, is science. You know, that it involves it's yeah. Well, some people would like to think that conscience may not necessarily be rooted in spirituality, but whatever it is, without getting into that debate, I think it's important for us to develop a much more skeptical and critical view of our knowledge and the limitations of our knowledge. Yeah.
Right, Dr. Kim, you want to add on a bit?
I just need to add something. In other words, this is with regards to what Professor Jomo once wrote, which I had the privilege of understanding and reading. The idea that I think inflation should not be more than 2%, or was it interest rate? Came from a politician in New Zealand. when he was on a campaign trail. And somehow this idea made its way to the Pacific and to Europe. And all the central banks insisted that inflation should never be more than 2%. But there was no, according to your scholarship, there was no scientific or empirical basis at all. In other words, you can actually allow inflation to go up a little bit. Do not be too afraid, because the previous government was consciously trying to keep it at less than 2% and making it fiscally conservative. So strange and peculiar idea can somehow catch the wave in New Zealand and find its way in Washington, D.C. and London and the rest of the world.
The original slogan was 2% by 92. This was an idea which came up in 1989. So 2 by 92, because this finance minister you were referring to, in New Zealand, his ambition was to challenge for the party leadership in 92. And he was going to say that if you could bring inflation down to 2%, and then 20 years later, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve, says 2.92 is the international consensus. Okay, New Zealand in those days had 3 million people and 80 million sheep.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, you have a question.
All right, my name is Farihin Lotfi. I'm third year student. Haven't taken Malaysian economy yet. I'm the representative from Bachelor of Economic Association. And before I speak my question, I just want to set the narrative first. Firstly, Prof. Jomo talk about peace, and then Dr. Pang talk about unimultipolarity, and Dr. Thomas talk about how we are not immune to the global superpower. And recently, I have a debate with my friends over hot pot meals, like how long Malaysian always at the mercy of others, especially at the mercy of global superpower. And as much as I want to remain optimist of the Gaza situation, Sudan, as well as Venezuela, we all see that talking about the title of our forum today, repositioning Malaysia in a global political order, or in this interregnum era, how long we actually always influenced by this global superpower. We have a good policy on our own, but when this abang long cuff kita semua macam terperanjat, and we really need to get our act together. And if we want to rely on ASEAN, ASEAN is neither infant or matured bloc, so we want the effect to be immediate. So how we can diverse the risk of being at the mercy of others, these global superpowers? Yeah, that's my question.
Okay, let's get another question from.
Hello, hi. Just two quick questions. One is Malaysia and a few other countries in Southeast Asia recently applied to join BRICS. Is there a significant value, and is it a game changer, if you like, for Malaysia becoming part of BRICS and hoping to promote their own agenda against, of course, the calculation of the global superpowers? That's the first question. Second question is, recently, at least of late, globally, we are seeing the coming back of industrial policies, not just for development, but for all other reasons, right? And Malaysia, somewhat, I mean, we are basically in the middle income trap and all those things. My question is a simple one. Would the panelists somewhat provide some insights on possible pathways for Malaysian industrial policies, especially not just for middle income trap issues, but making sure that we are also resilient in terms of dealing with uncertainties of today's economic situation, the global supply shocks, and all those things. So, what are the sort of pathways, industrial policy-wise, that Malaysian can take? That's my two questions.
Thank you very much. Let's take another. Yep.
Sorry, thank you. I'm doing my PhD in Islamic economics. So my question is back to AI, but with the perspective of colonialism. So to the panelists, what are your thoughts on looking at AI supply chain as a new form of colonialism, as most of the production is dominated by imperial powers? I would like to kind of like pick your brain in terms of either from the economic perspective or from the foreign policy perspective, because when we look at data centers, a lot of the supply chain are within ASEAN region, etc., or is going towards that.
Okay, thank you much. Anyone else? Maybe two more questions? Okay, there's one at the back there. Oh, the mic doesn't work. Okay.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Irshadi, working in Bank. Used to be a student of Dr. Riasat, by the way. My question is actually the same narrative as the first two questions, but I actually want to direct the question to Mr. Thomas. As earlier, I believe you argue that Malaysia should act as a middle power rather than a price taker. Is that correct? Okay. We should become much more than a price taker. However, recent development that we have last year in November, which is US-Malaysia agreement on reciprocal tariff, show that Malaysia, we had to accommodate a lot with US demands to avoid punitive tariff that would affect tens of billions ringgit, if not in terms of semiconductor. So how do we actually how realistic is to move beyond being a price taker in that sense? Yeah, that's my questions. Thank you.
Maybe just one more question. In front. Okay, this. Somebody here? It's not raised. No. Okay, so they're pointing me towards. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to hear thoughts on the AI bubble and the possible implications on Malaysia. That's all.
Think we can take each question one at a time. So first of all, how long will Malaysia be at the mercy of others, and how do we move forward from the current situation we find ourselves in? So I think maybe Professor Jomo, you can start and then the others weigh in.
Anyone's question not answered?
Right. Okay, so maybe
I'll be guided by Professor Aslam and respond to 4 issues which I might be able to deal with. The first is on the question of BRICS.
okay.
Frankly, I don't think it's really worthwhile for Malaysia to spend so much effort and time trying to get into BRICS. BRICS is by definition not committed to anything except being part of the global south and having a certain financial strength. Okay, it is not committed to particularly the development of the global south or anything like that. What is desperately needed is the kind of think tank support, if I can put it that way, for the global south. When the global south negotiates on a whole range of issues in New York and elsewhere, they have very little. It really depends on whether the major countries like Brazil in the past and India in the past, no longer India today, will provide the research support for this. So the result is that we are very, very unprepared to negotiate almost everything. So that is currently, there is a little bit of resources in something called the G77, which does not have a sustained research capacity. And then there are some resources in the South Center in Geneva, which again has an agenda which is dictated by whoever controls the South Center. NAM The non-aligned movement, there was a think tank which was set up in 1987 after NAM was created in India, and that under the Modi government, they have transformed it into simply an auxiliary of the Commerce Ministry of India. So there is no capacity. That's why I think it's much more important for us to give more life and substance to NAM. But I have not seen anybody, any significant government besides, countries like Iran and so on and so forth, willing to put any resources there. So this is a major problem, and we cannot rely on the goodwill, for example, of Brazil. Lula might be replaced easily by Bolsonaro, one of Bolsonaro's son in the next election. And that will be the end of whatever leadership Brazil has been providing. Okay, you can't even get the lousy outcome which came out of Belém. Okay, so I think but you're not going to get aid from BRICS. You have no illusions. BRICS is now worse than it was from the original five. Yeah, so I think it is really. I'm not sure who has advised the government on the question of BRICS, but I really don't think it's worthwhile. On the question of industrial policy pathways, that's a huge question, which I will pass on right now. But I do think what we do need in this country is an understanding of where industrial policy came from. Look at the major institutions of industrial policy which were created under different circumstances in this country soon after independence. There was something called the Malayan Industrial Development Finance, Malayan Industrial Estates Limited, and so on and so forth. What has happened to them? Malaysian Industrial Finance is basically functioning like a bank. Okay? The so-called SME banks finances a very small fraction, not even 5% of SMEs are financed by the SME bank. But reduction of number of banks in Malaysia from over 60 to about 10 right now has not really served the medium-sized industry. So we have a lot of rhetoric about the future is with SMEs, etc., but next to no significant support. So I think we really need to get beyond that. But I think the full discussion of industrial policy pathways will take too much time, and somebody raised the question of the ART. There's so much in it which is you can spend the whole night criticizing it. Okay, but the problem was this obsession with the so-called ASEAN centrality, if you may excuse me, Thomas. The ASEAN's, what were we trying to assume? What ASEAN's major achievement was ZOPFAN in 1973, more than half a century ago. The major economic institution which had created was the ASEAN Free Trade Area in the 1990s. Okay, nothing else has come out of ASEAN on the economic front since then. So what does it mean to talk about ASEAN centrality? It means centrality of what? So I think that's why I was making a plea earlier for thinking much more about ASEAN plus 3. ASEAN plus 3, the economic weight of ASEAN plus 3 is 40% of the world economy. Okay, and now the plus 3 is so fed up with ASEAN because ASEAN is hardly moving that the plus 3 got together before Liberation Day for Trump, and they coordinated. China, Japan, and Korea, who didn't talk to each other before, they got together and started coordinating. Whereas, where was ASEAN? ASEAN, even to get the multilateralization of the swap arrangements among central banks, took about a quarter century. So we have seen very poor progress as far as ASEAN economic cooperation is concerned, let alone any kind of leadership of the ASEAN plus 3 potential. So I think that's where our hope, because frankly, ASEAN alone doesn't have that kind of weight. But ASEAN plus 3 with China and Japan, we really punch above our weight. And if you think about the Asian Monetary Fund, the only country where the central bank governor has been pushing very hard for it for almost a decade now is actually the Korean Central Bank. No other country has pushed for it. Not Japan, not China. Okay, so I think we really have to re-examine our assumptions about what is possible and what is viable. The last point is on the question of AI. I don't want to say anything about AI, but I think Malaysia's interest in attracting data processing to Malaysia is really exactly. Thank you very much, Thomas. It's a scam. Okay, 60% of it will be in Johor, and right now Johor is already water stressed. Okay, there's not enough. If Singapore wanted to increase the amount of water they buy from Malaysia, there's nothing available. There are 7 small rivers in Johor. The rivers are nothing like the Perak River or the Pahang River, let alone the Rejang or the Baram River. So what water is, it's very water intensive, besides being highly energy intensive. And we are going to subsidize that energy. How ridiculous can you get? And so there are vested interests who are pushing this whole thing. So I think before we get too caught up in this whole idea of, AI is our future, etc., think a little bit about, the basic, well, not quite infrastructure, but you know what I mean, right? The preconditions to run these AI models. And the reason why I'm not trying to push for DeepSeek, but DeepSeek is far, far more energy efficient because of the nature of the algorithms, etc., than any of the Western things. So I really think we have to get over our fetishization of artificial intelligence. And I think if anybody is covering this from the press point of view, Thomas Daniel's point earlier about it being a scam is probably the most okay. It is okay. Then you can quote me. Okay. I think I'm beyond the age of being arrested by whatever, but it really is a scam, and even the US doesn't want to have any more data processing centers. Even the Great Lakes in the US cannot provide enough fresh water for this. I wrote a piece on this a couple of months ago. It talks about, there's a Malaysian version of it, there's an international version of it. All this is well established. Okay, so what Thomas said but cannot be attributed to him is really something everybody who is concerned should pay a serious attention to. Thank you.
Right. Maybe you're free to go for any of the questions.
Just very quickly. So a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two, I've been tuning into the podcast of Gita Rijawan, the former trade minister of Indonesia. So according to his calculation and based on his latest books on Southeast Asia, China and United States have achieved about 10,000 kilowatt per capita to make that realistic transition into AI, based on their vested interest or not. Singapore is at now 9,500 kilowatts per capita. Brunei is about the same. Malaysia is about 5,005. Indonesia about 4,005. So what I'm trying to say is that not unless you reach that stage of 9,005 or 10,000, you are actually looking at a pipe dream. And you are using a lot of energy, resources, and water, as Professor Jomo said, which, of course, Thomas put it in very vivid format. Now, another reason why all these data processing centers are not necessarily helpful to the Malaysian economy is they generate very few jobs. Very few jobs. Maybe you have security guards, maybe you have people who man the fences and whatnot, but when it's completely automated, it doesn't really create a lot of jobs to begin with. So in that sense, we have to be very careful about some of the fads that we tap into.
I'll try to address a little bit of all the questions, and what will happen is I'll address none satisfactorily. On your point, Miss, on AI and how it's being developed by imperial powers, I would include both countries in Asia and those in the West as imperial powers. Now, I don't look at AI, but my colleagues do. And actually, one of the things that they told me was that I think this is a point that is noted by some stakeholders in the government. If you look at the Malaysia's AI action plan, I mean, it's very job centric, but there is a recognition that the modalities that shape AI are largely being shaped by outside powers, very powerful interests, whether they're governments or in private sector. And there's a need to be aware of that. The ASEAN Responsible AI Roadmap, which was launched in KL last year, explicitly talks about that. But so it addresses it, but it doesn't address how to address it. So I guess, kena tunggu dan lihat lah, as we do with all things. One more point, one interesting point on data centers, which I think Prof. Jomo alluded to, is that it's interesting that a lot of the deals on data centers were cut when there were certain expectations of how big or how much requirement a data center would require. But you now see evolution in tech where companies might not need that large of a data center anymore. So when we've got all these contracts that are already signed to build these things in Malaysia, but will you have the requisite clients for them in the future when when technology might allow them to be more efficient with who they choose to do business with? So to your point earlier, I did not say we are a middle power. In fact, what I said was I think it's a complete waste of time for Malaysians to debate whether we are a middle power or not, because that just distracts from more important conversations on what our interests are and what are we doing to secure those interests. I think this question on how do we move, can we move beyond being a price taker? Honestly, no. I think we will always be a price taker given our economic structures, given our positions, our size, etc. But there are certain areas where we can, together with others, be norm setters. Whether it's in whether it's in continuing to push for multilateralism to be upheld, pushing for more inclusive international norms and systems. I mean, I think this is in our interest to do, and I think there are like-minded countries around the world, very fragmented as they are, and if we put in the effort, perhaps there are things that we can do, but we need to be very realistic about what the limitations are. Now, to the first question on can we de-risk from global superpowers? Again, I repeat what I said earlier. I don't think so, given just based on who we trade with, right? I mean, you saw how quickly the government struck a deal with the Trump administration for a variety of reasons. Even though, in that deal, I think a foreign diplomat told me there were 4 the United States shell and about 30 plus Malaysia shells. So that tells you the weight of the arrangement. But then why agree and why go into it, right? Why, when you see Malaysian ministers and leaders going to China, you sign huge contracts of huge numbers, and you see Chinese businesses moving into this country in ways that you probably wouldn't have imagined 20 years ago. I think fundamentally there is a recognition that whether it's short-term interests or long-term interests, that the people in power believe that this is the way to go, that you can't escape these major powers. It doesn't mean that Malaysia doesn't try to diversify, but I think we try to diversify with traditional powers, right? You try to see what you can do more with Japan or the EU, which you've done with for ages. You try to see what you can do more with India, although politics sometimes gets in the way with that. Then you have BRICS. I think many people within the bureaucracy have their own ideas about BRICS, and they're not necessarily very complementary. But the thinking is that, okay, fine, we announced that we want to join. And let's just leave it at that. You don't move forward, but you don't criticize, you don't pull out, you don't move forward, and that's it's a very established tactic in the bureaucracy, right? You don't repudiate something, you don't pull out of it, but you just let it sit there and you do nothing. Sorry? Yes, centrality. I think that has answered all the questions. I apologize if I've missed any out. Thank you very much.
Can I try to chip in some thoughts on centrality?
Yeah.
Since Prof. Aslan mentioned. Back in the days when I was the director in ASEAN Secretariat, the exact phraseology is actually the centrality of ASEAN. But then after one event between President Obama and all the rest of the leaders from Southeast Asia in Sunnyvale, California, the phrase became ASEAN centrality because Obama wanted to provide this feel-good feeling to Southeast Asia that we are not coming in to dominate you. And somehow the ASEAN leaders liked the taste of it and began using it widely in all their speeches. But then in the ASEAN Charter, the centrality of ASEAN refers to 3 dimensions, and it's all very economically driven. Digital connectivity, labor connectivity, in other words, our labor force can work in another country. And thirdly, it's also about institutional congruence. In other words, your ministry can work with mine, and that's what it's meant by ASEAN centrality. It's very economic. It's more in the pillar of economic community rather than in the political and security community. But since we have fallen into the trap of being garlanded and praised by President Obama, and the habit and the culture of diplomacy has carried on.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's gotten quite late and we've gone beyond the time fielding questions. So what is the takeaway? At the end, it's regionalism, strategic regionalism, just to put it in a very crass summarized way. So thank you very much for all the comments, the feedback, and all the interest and everything. Let me hand back the floor back to our MC, Brother Shamsul.
Thank you, Dr. Riasat. Thank you, panel. Give an applause to all our speakers, please. Yeah, I noticed the sleepy faces. We will get out of this hall as soon as possible. The takeaways for you, all of you youths, I know that many of you might feel that you are not understanding the gist of what these panels are talking today because it might be high level for you, but just take it like this. The only certain thing today in the era of Trump 2.0 is uncertainty. And it's how you adapt to it. What you've learned in your textbooks until today might not be relevant now. So that's what you need to take. And if you think that all about AI and everything is not affecting you, it does and it is. So please, when you go out of this hall, act upon it and read more. So that's the conclusion for all of you youths today. So, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, to appreciate our panel speakers, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Aslam Hanif, Deputy Rector of Research, Innovation and Development, to come to the center stage to give our token of appreciation to our panels, as usual. Give an applause to Prof. Aslam, please. For our first panelist, I would like to invite Professor Emeritus Dr. Jomo Kwame Sundaram to center stage to receive the token of appreciation. Give an applause to Prof. Jomo, please.
Yes. My wife was there. Your wife works with Prof.
She attended the session. She spoke very kindly. So when she knew you were attended,
Next, I would like to invite Dr. Phar Beng to receive his token of appreciation. Give an applause to Dr. Phar Beng. And not to forget, I would like to invite Mr. Thomas Daniel to receive token of appreciation. All right, now I would like to invite all guests to the center stage back. We would like to have photography session with all of the participants. Yes. Oh yeah. Sorry, I forgot. Sorry, my mistake. I would like to invite Dr. Riasat as the moderator to receive the token as well. Yeah, you don't want to, but you get it. Yeah. Even I forgotten it. Sorry. I invite back all of our panel to the center stage. Brothers and sisters, please stand up and move, squeeze in to the center as usual. Yeah. Ready? Kau nak ambil dari atas ke?